Top 5 ways coaches need to strategize in the portal. This is from by request from Tim Finch. So here's your Bon Jovi song, Tim. But no, I thought this was an interesting topic and thought we'd dive into it. Number 5, and this is kind of not necessarily like in order of what you have to do, like maybe in order how you start it. So 5 to 1. But number 5, who can you afford? That is the first question you have to ask yourself. How can we afford this person in the portal? Do we have the NIL budget to do so? What are they asking for? The negotiation process is not as it's not as straightforward as professional sports. We'll just put it that way. It's still very nebulous to how all these go because there's not any kind of rules to it. So you have to figure out what money you have available and who you can afford and where those slots go. So that's the first thing you have to do, which is something that is very new to coaches because that's not, completely what they had to do before. It's not like they weren't throwing some under the table things around college athletics too. But as far as now where people can just straight up ask for it and you can't say, and you can't, go, well, that's illegal. You have to figure out what you have in the kitty.
Yeah, what's this topic again? I'm sorry.
Top 5 ways coaches need to strategize in the portal.
Okay. But aren't they not really supposed to be involved with that anyways? That's another part of the stupid setup of college.
But they are.
No, I know, but I'm pointing out the stupidity of the whole thing is that they're not even technically allowed to be involved in that part of this whole thing, at least when it comes to working with the collectives in most cases. So, yes, I guess pull whatever money you got from your donors and your collectives and figure out, what you're able to spend. That is a good starting point when you're about to go out on the market and basically go into free agency is, what do you have at your disposal and how do you sort out of that pool how much you need for how many people? Do you got $2 million to work with? How many guys do you need? You need 14 players? Well, you got to strategize and figure out how all that money's going to work. And yeah, suddenly you need even more staffers to now give financial advice and help break down the money to pay your roster. So, yeah, that's pretty wild.
Number 4, go for longer-term depth. So, there are going to be those one-hit wonders that you get that are going to help. But the guys who really help you, and this is, I'll just use the Baylor example, where they were hurt in this year's roster particularly was that the 2020 class was not a great one. And then the 2021 first portal class that they could have made up for some of that where you find more players that fit was not really more than like 2 or 3 guys. So you need to use that time to not necessarily just get the Cam Ward who's going to make a huge difference for you, but get a guy who's got a couple years that you can develop to make up for maybe, especially if you're a newer coach, the guys that didn't hit right away and may not fit what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think it just kind of depends on what situation you're looking at. I think everybody ideally is looking for depth, but you can bring in all the transfer portal guys you want, and they don't necessarily pan out, And so, yeah, ideally you'd go for longer term depth. If you're putting together your list of to-dos, this would be on there. But whether or not you're actually able to do that is a totally different story. There's a number of guys that were brought in this past year, just down the road that didn't end up doing anything of note whatsoever. A handful of guys. That you wouldn't even have realized were on the roster that were big gets out of the transfer portal. They'll be back next year, some of them. So I guess that plays into some of that depth. But, yeah, whether that's impactful or not is a different story.
Yeah, well, and I'll just say this. With the one-time transfer rule now in effect for guys who have not graduated, getting a guy who's a redshirt freshman has a little bit more value, even if he's not totally ready to play. If he's at a position of need and you feel you can coach him up, then that is something that'll help you. Number 3, fill your starters first. You got to find the spots where, hey, we need to have a guy that starts here right now. And so that's I know it's kind of a common sense thing, but now that you have it available to you, look, if you need Baylor probably needs a starting quarterback. I don't know, that's the first thing. They were going to have to get a quarterback or two no matter what in this cycle. And they got one I know coming in as a recruit. But they're going to have to get somebody to compete with Sawyer Robertson. So that's something they have to do. If you're Colorado, you got to find some offensive line starters. Even the guys who were bad on your team last year are leaving in the portal. So you don't you can't rely on the returning starter. Maybe they'll be better next year thing. You got to go get those starters and fill at least those out first before you start thinking about everybody else you got to get.
Yeah, I think it's kind of common sense. That's you need a quarterback. You better go get yourself a quarterback. If you need offensive linemen, better get those guys. So yeah, I agree that you need to get your starters wherever those holes are. And I guess if you have the luxury of worrying about filling out depth, then that's a luxury, and you can worry about that later on. But yeah, it doesn't really make sense to get your fourth linebacker before you get your first offensive lineman, unless you, I guess, have a plan in place to where that's how it's supposed to work out, I suppose. I don't know. But, yeah, I mean, it's important to get your starters in there.
Number 2, leave no stone unturned. Find your Cam Wards, your Jared Verses. Those are the guys on the thing. There's a quarterback from New Hampshire that's on his way to Minnesota. They haven't been great at quarterback. He's going there. Who's the guy from Holy Cross?
I already forgot his name.
But yeah, go find those guys. There's 3 linemen from the Ivy League that people are getting. Joey Slackman, Thor Griffith, and there's one more that people are looking at right now. And look, if you're good, like if you're good on the next like really dominant on that lower level, then you can be a good player at least in the Power 5. Florida State has a guy named Braden Fisk who you saw dominate against Louisville the other night. He came from Western Michigan. Like, those are the guys, to me also, some of those guys might have a little bit more value than the 5-star who's burned out, right? Like, there's always going to be the guy, well, his guy was great in high school and I can fix him. But the guy who's on the way up, to me, is a little bit more interesting, especially if you're trying to like maybe close the gap and win the conference title. Those guys who are veterans and are on the way up might be better for you than the guys who might be on the way down.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on the situation, and leave no stone unturned. I guess you look everywhere. Matthew Smoak is the Holy Cross quarterback that you're trying to think of, and I couldn't remember his name. I just don't know how much you can really do this now because I feel like now everybody knows who Matthew Smoak, the Holy Cross quarterback, is. Like, who knew 2 weeks ago who this guy was outside of just hardcore football fans? And now, he's not well known, but I think he's much more well known now than he was, and that goes for a lot of guys. But yeah, find your Cam Ward if you can find him. I just think now people know about Cam Ward, and now they like, hey, better go check out Incarnate Word, see if they got any talent. Better go look at Holy Cross. And I don't know how many people were doing that beforehand, but they are now. And so it's harder to do than before. But, yeah, I mean, you definitely need to look outside of just the guy from Auburn or the guy from the Oregon schools or just somebody who's from a name brand. There are good players out there that didn't end up at those types of places for one reason or another, whether it was grades or just overlooked or whatever the case may be, and now here's a big opportunity to go and get those guys where they rightfully belong. That's certainly what happened with Cam Ward.
Yep. Number 1, make a splash when you're given the opportunity. I know that like this and number 5 may not go right together, but when you can make a splash with a guy who can make a huge difference in your program, I think you got to do it now. Especially if it's the perfect fit. So I think some people are too liberal in the portal. Some people are too conservative. You got to play that thing right in the middle. But sometimes when the opportunity to make a big move presents itself to you from somebody who can, then go do it and don't get caught up in the details of it. I think that college football is a little bit different now because, and look, it's not like you're tied to this guy forever, too. That's the other good thing. The difference between the one thing I'll say is better about college free agency than pro free agency is, you sign a guy to a 5-year contract in the pros, even if you have to cut him after a year and a half, like he's a total bust, you're on the hook for all his money. In college, it's just this time, then it's over. So, I say make a splash when you can. But
I mean, I think that's what everybody's trying to do is make splashes with the transfer portal, and the bigger the better. It doesn't always necessarily. It's like signing day. It's the same exact thing.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you sign a splashy 5-star. Sometimes they pan out, sometimes they don't, but you at least get that splash on signing day. So, if you've got that opportunity in the portal, which, it seems like there's more and more splash players that are in that thing with each passing year, then, if you're able to do it, then cannonball, I guess. Go ahead and make that move.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Garrett. Thanks to